Hello everybody and welcome back to another Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review. In today's review we're going to be travelling back to the 1960s as I'm going to be taking a look at the brand new series of the First Doctor Adventures, starring Stephen Noonan as the First Doctor alongside Lauren Cornelius as Dodo Chaplet in The Outlaws, as well as The Miniaturist, written by Lizzie Hopley and Elizabeth Miles. This release is available to order now from the Big Finish website. There is a physical CD box set for £19.99, as well as a download, I do believe for around £16.99, and do most certainly recommend checking out this release on the Big Finish website and listening to the trailer in order to hear the new First Doctor in action. Now, one of the first things that I do want to mention throughout this review is that yes, we do have a new First Doctor. In this review I'm going to be covering the new Impressionist that we have. Of course, you also have David Bradley playing the First Doctor as well, and one of the things that Big Finish has stressed over the past few months is that both David Bradley and Stephen Noonan are both going to be continuing the role. I have two First Doctors going on at the same time. Basically, we have the initial TARDIS team with Ian Chesterton, Barbara and Susan, and then we have the Stephen Noonan adventures with Dodo Chaplet. So we have two very different eras, and to be honest, at first I was a little bit uncertain about how this would work. However, now having listened to this set, I'm really excited to see what this era holds for the First Doctor. Outlaws by Elizabeth Miles begins a new chapter for the First Doctor adventures, developing both his and Dodo Chaplet's relationship, starting off with a four-part adventure. The Doctor and Dodo arrive just before the invasion of Lincoln by the French, with King Louis wanting to overthrow the King of England. With the supply routes to the city being plagued by a series of robberies by the Outlaws, it's time once more for the First Doctor to come face to face with the meddling monk. This story is a celebration of the Time Meddler. Being a pure historical, it means that we really get to know the period and those who live within the Lincoln Castle. I was really happy to see that these new First Doctor adventures are continuing the theme of including one pure historical and one science fiction story, really capturing the essence of 1960s Who. And speaking of capturing that essence, I think Elizabeth Miles does a great job at this. The plot itself really isn't too hard to follow, and the characters all have clear personalities, which makes them easy to differentiate between. The narrative follows the usual style for a pure historical, seeing the TARDIS land on the build-up to disaster, and the Doctor and his companion are chaotically caught in between. I'm sure most of you are probably watching this review to hear my opinion of Stephen Noonan as the First Doctor, as of course previously we've had David Bradley acting as the First Doctor for quite a number of years, so let's dig a little bit deeper into that. I really enjoyed his performance. I think that Stephen brings an element of authenticity to the role, which really captures, in a rather spooky manner actually, the whole feeling of 60s Doctor Who stories. Within my David Bradley First Doctor reviews, I often describe them as the new adventures of the First Doctor, with a complete recasting of the TARDIS team. They feel a little bit more polished compared to a TV Doctor Who 60s production. With this new series, Stephen Noonan and Lauren Cornelius, I think The Outlaws captures not only the style of the era, but also what some may call its weaknesses, but to many fans, make this era the unique era that it is. For example, the small subtleties within Stephen Noonan's portrayal, such as him flustering words, getting mixed up, stutters and mumbles in speech, all of which that would normally be edited out of usual modern day TV, however are generally a common occurrence within 1960s Doctor Who, and from Stephen Noonan's perspective, it really brings the role to life and replicates what Hartnell did with the role. We're not only getting a recasting of the First Doctor here, but we also have a little bit of a glimpse into the man who played the role as well, which I think is really impressive. The Outlaws not only feels like a celebration of this era, but a love letter to the production behind the scenes, which ultimately shaped what Doctor Who is today. The non-slick approach does make this production feel a little bit rough around the edges, but ultimately the plot shines through. Very much like how you have those little production errors within the TV 60s episodes, this episode on audio feels very much like that in a complementary way. There is a little bit of a love story going on within this episode where we have the sheriff's granddaughter and one of the outlaws being William of Berkshire, which is really lovely to see unfold across the 4 parts, adding a personal element into what often forms the pure historical narrative. Carly Day does a great job at portraying the rather naive Indenaya, who is the granddaughter of the sheriff, who is obsessed with the perfect love story, the idea of somebody who is born into privilege falling in love with somebody who is an outlaw. It was also a delight seeing the First Doctor once again face off with the meddling monk. Rufus Hound reminds me of a crazy professor, reckless and simply wanting to cause a little bit of chaos, and the First Doctor's reaction to this is naturally frustration, which leads to some very funny interactions in the later half of this story. In fact, the whole episode has quite a lot of funny moments. I could imagine this episode being a theatre production, once again really drawing on that style of the First Doctor era, seeing lots of scenes unfold seemingly within one take. The monk's evil plans are usually based on changing tiny events to cause bigger ripples, and that is exactly what we get to see throughout this story. It's not overly complex, nor is it confusing, making for a great audio for newcomers, and the monk's plot overall is simply just a little bit daft. It's a bit of a different portrayal compared to the original monk that we got to see within the Time Meddler, which for some it may take a little bit of getting used to. Being a historical story, you do also get that sense of deception, who is working for what side, which reminds me of other pure historical 60s episodes, the likes of The Massacre and The Reign of Terror. It's a very easy listen, and if you are a fan of authentic 60s Big Finish stories, I think this one will be right up your street. This is one of those box sets that I'm quite sort of sad to say is one of those releases that you simply have to give it a chance. I think if you are a fan of 1960s Doctor Who, then purchase this box set, give it a go, see what you think. If you get a physical CD and don't like it, maybe stick it on eBay. No doubt there will be somebody out there who will enjoy it. But it's one of those things where, as always when it comes to recasting Doctors, if you're somebody who is really, really protective over William Hartnell's portrayal and legacy on the show and you don't want to see anybody else filling those shoes, then this will not be a box set for you. But in my eyes, I think that Stephen Noonan has most certainly tried his best to replicate not only the First Doctor, but William Hartnell himself. I don't know if it was the way that I listened to The Outlaws as a story, because I actually listened to it on a train on the commute home, and so as a result I was really, really focused in on the narrative, and I don't know if it was just because I was simply travelling that kind of made me focus in on the episode a bit more. About the episode that I just instantly felt very familiar with, and like I was in very, very comfortable hands. And one of the things that Stephen Noonan has done to replicate his impersonation of William Hartnell as the First Doctor is he has watched every single First Doctor story, including the missing episodes, and has recorded himself saying the lines and trying to get those mannerisms and quirks down to a T, so we have lots of that being used throughout both this story and The Miniaturist. I think it really does pay off. I think there is something about Stephen Noonan's portrayal that is so truthful and so authentic, and I really, really did enjoy it. Lizzie Hopley pens the second episode of this set, being The Miniaturist. This episode is only 1 hour long this time round, split across 2 half-an-hour parts, allowing us listeners to experience 60s Doctor Who in a bite-sized chunk, which is in fact a rather rare occurrence. Yet still, this episode has an incredibly strong narrative. Standalone 1 hour stories are often some of the gems within the Big Finish catalogue. The Tortured Main Range is a good example of this, with experimental and exciting new ways of storytelling. The Miniaturist is an incredibly exciting story for me, as when listening to this episode it was revealed that not only is this episode set in North Yorkshire, it's actually set pretty much within my hometown where I've lived for the vast majority of my life, as this episode is set within 2019, so in fact within my lifetime as well, so technically within the Doctor Who universe I was probably kicking around when the events of this episode unfolded. It's really surreal hearing local areas to me being referred to, my little patch of the world is being represented within the Doctor Who universe, so yeah, thanks Lizzie Hopley, because I really do appreciate it. We're going to start off The Miniaturist by talking about Dodo, a rather underserved companion on TV, this time round portrayed by Lauren Cornelius, and much like Stephen Noonan, Lauren's portrayal regenerates the role for the 21st century audio drama format, whilst also allowing this episode to feel very 60s in its design. The placement of this set allows us to essentially delve into a previously rather undeveloped section of the First Doctor era. Lauren's performance in both stories is really warm and fun, and she's very northern, very human, and has a taste for adventure, which I think is perfect for a companion role. I think she also very much keeps the Doctor in check, especially throughout the Outlaws, when he becomes quite grumpy whilst battling the monk and his absurd plans. It's quite an interesting point in both her and the Doctor's timeline, as Stephen has now left the TARDIS, and the Doctor by this point has witnessed quite a number of departures, including his own granddaughter Susan, who he's still kind of recovering from the loss of. So we now have left a companion who I dare say the First Doctor doesn't particularly know too well, but these stories are set to develop that. The miniaturist sees us dig a little bit into Dodo's mind, her love for the Doctor, but also perhaps that sense of naivety when it comes to time travel. She seems to always get along with the people she meets, and in turn, this allows us to find out more about the supporting characters in a rather seemingly natural way. I can't wait to hear more from Lauren in the future. As for the plot itself, there is a deep mine in North Yorkshire, Colton to be exact, and the local scientists are searching the very old sedimentary seabed for unusual things, but it's soon clear that there's something haunting, spooky, and paranormal to the mine and its surrounding areas, with both people and large objects from postboxes and bridges going missing. This whole story is excellently structured. It presents itself like a hallucinogenic dream, especially in the second half as we dig into how and why things are occurring. Annette Badland does a superb job as the voice, drawing on characters' emotions personally, whilst also feeling detached, uncertain, and untrustworthy. I can't really say too much else about the character without revealing too much, but what I will say is that she is brilliant. The one little niggle that I have with this adventure is that considering it's set within 2019, I can't help but feel that the First Doctor and Dodo feel very 60s, the Doctor in particular, which is odd given that he is a Time Lord. Perhaps it's just my own personal perspective, it certainly doesn't take away from the story overall. It just feels very odd seeing the First Doctor on a modern day Earth setting, tampering with modern tech, and it still very much feels like this is a Doctor who is set within the past. Very much like the Outlaws, this story does still feel like a 60s production, so I suppose it's as if we are back in the 60s and they are guessing what 2019 will be like. The whole story has a very surreal vibe, but not in a way that makes the story feel overcomplicated. If anything, I actually think it's another really accessible story. Stephen Noonan also has another great performance, very enthusiastic, and it's clear that the Doctor is knowledgeable and very alien. Each line is delivered in a way that the other Doctors wouldn't, so it really keeps the listener on their toes, and it really adds mystery to the Doctor once more. In this story, I do very much get the sense that he is a mysterious magical figure wandering through space and time. I can't wait to see him venture into actual space, perhaps within the next volume that we now have confirmation will be happening. Overall for the miniaturist, this story has a reserved special place in my heart. A really bizarre story, but one that I'm certainly going to remember. I love the way it plays with characters' minds and perceptions, and I love the way that time flows, making it very unsettling, as if you're kind of on a psychedelic trip along with the TARDIS team. The added inclusion of this being set in a northern town is really appreciated compared to other 60s tales. I think this one really does stand out. Much like the Outlaws, and seeing that story and being able to hear Stephen Noonan's portrayal, I think The Miniaturist is an episode that you simply have to listen to experience it, because it's one of those episodes that I think does not really fit in with 1960s Doctor Who, but it feels very 1960s Doctor Who. I think it is very daring. It kind of reminds me of Planet of the Giants. That is quite absurd because they have the characters in these rather large rooms making them look tiny, but this episode kind of plays with that whole concept of what you can see, what you can visualise, what's your mind doing, and I think that if this episode had a massive budget, it would look superb, very much like how the Celestial Toymaker kind of plays with reality as well. This episode is a bit like that. It's a little bit otherworldly, a little bit disorientating, and it works so well as a result within the audio drama format because of that. I found it a really intriguing listen, and part of me thinks it's a shame that this episode can't be sold by itself, because not that I don't like The Outlaws, I think that both stories actually do struggle to put one of the stories as the best episode of the set. I think that both of them are very good in very different ways, but it's a shame that The Miniaturist isn't by itself, because I would like a lot of people to experience this story because of how different it is. Thank you very much for watching this review of The Outlaws. I really hope you have enjoyed it. Do of course stay tuned on The Host Productions for regular Big Finish audio drama reviews as well as product reviews. And of course on that note, have a nice day, and I shall see you all next time.